It is the year 2472, and the Earth has suffered a great calamity. Hundreds of years of popular culture have vanished. Without the sacred films and texts for guidance, civilization is devoid of anything cool. Then, 3 incubation chambers are unearthed, and from within, men from the time of the great blockbusters emerge. Now, through highly interesting conversations, they share invaluable insight about what once was. The movies, the shows, the comics, toys, and books. This is
The Hyperspace.
Podcasting in the 25th century.
Welcome in, podcast pioneers, to the hyperspace. Podcasting in the 25th century, the interweb's first, and after 7 seasons, still only podcast. My name is Jared.
Hey, my name's Matt.
I'm Mike.
7 seasons. Still here.
This is the season 7 premiere. We're still kicking. And
the only podcast. How are we still the only podcast? Nobody else has started a podcast?
I don't know. We're the only podcast network, of course. We've got several shows on the hyperspace going right now. We've got Good, Bad, and Ugly. We've got Carbonite Chronicles. And, we're not stopping. It doesn't matter if the world can't catch up with us. We're going to keep moving forward here.
I'm looking forward to our new Ghost Hunters podcast.
Yeah. So, how's everyone been in the interim here? What you guys been up to?
Well, I've been working, at the tube factory, making nutrient paste. It's a grind, but I look forward to these days when we can all gather and share our knowledge.
That's not too bad. I'm on the government job still, where I'm actually going around on the street level, which, by the way, is really far down, and I'm cleaning up the nutrient paste waste. But it's a government job, and years ago they made it so nutrient paste just disappears anyway. So I'm literally just down there chasing paste as it just automatically disappears. So I'm just collecting a paycheck, man.
Man, that is that's very crazy. Mike, what have you been up to? I heard you had a problem with the shed you were putting up next to your tube.
Yeah, it was an adventure. First of all, the most fascinating thing about all of it is when I went to the store to look at sheds, they have them on display for you in the parking lot for you to look at. And I discovered that homeless people were squatting in their shed displays.
No.
And when you say squatting, you mean quite literally.
They were
squatting.
They were trash. Their filth lined the floor.
Looked like half the picture you sent, half the floor looks soaked.
Yeah, it was disgusting. And so I bought one, and I bought the lumber to build the floor for it. And I started to put the shed together and realized they had sent me the wrong shed, or given me the wrong shed. But it was, I had bought an 8x10 and they gave me a 10x14.
Oh, well.
So it was considerably larger. So I had to add more flooring.
So I've never bought a shed. So when they deliver a shed, is it?
No, I picked
in
it
one
up.
piece?
It was in a box, and it's completely disassembled. So the box was actually, considering the size of the shed, the box wasn't that big, but it was jam-packed full of all that metal. So picking up, that's why I didn't call the store to tell them, because I was like, I had already ripped open the box.
You weren't repacking that stuff.
And the conversation would have gone like this: you sent me the wrong shed. If you want it, you're going to have to come get it. And I've already opened the box.
Yeah.
They probably would have just told you to keep it anyway.
Well, they got 200 more quatlos out of me because I had to add a flooring to it. So
you ended up paying for it anyway. Wow.
Yeah. And hopefully none of them listen to our. I remember that guy.
I'll tell you, the ones that do listen are extremely loyal to the podcast.
Oh, loyal, you say? It's funny that you bring that up, Matt. What a segue. Because on today's show, we're going to be talking about loyalty. Loyalty to the things that we enjoy. Loyalty to maybe a particular music group, particular series of films, a filmmaker, those kind of things. And have we remained loyal? Has loyalty turned to obligation? And has obligation turned into apathy? We're going to discuss all of these things. And before we do that, I'd like to say that this is a topic that was suggested to me by my friend Matt, and not Matt, the co-host of the show, and not Matt, the brother of Mike. This was a guy that I work with who is known as TV's Matt Davis. And we were having a great conversation about this. And I said, I'd like to talk about this on the podcast. So, Matt, shout out to you back in the 21st century. We're going to be talking about that today. So, I'd like to throw it out there. Right now, we're going to start with the good. What is something that you both have enjoyed for a good portion of your life? Decades. Maybe not that long, but maybe longer.
Before we do that, can I kind of toss out what that loyalty entails to me?
Go ahead, please.
I think it starts when we're younger, we get into stuff. Like, we get into a film series or like you said, a band. And then the loyalty is, do you stick with it through the ups and the downs? And I think, this isn't going nowhere. So let's forget this whole part. I tried to describe
I think
it.
actually, I was thinking the exact same thing that you would, believe it or not. So
you have it. You're talking about.
It's like, oh, okay. So when you're younger, I think it starts when you're younger. You gravitate towards certain things. You kind of latch onto them because of your enjoyment. And as you go through life, you grow, but then the bands, or if it's a film director, they change too. And it's kind of interesting to think, does your maturity align, or do you kind of grow apart? It's almost like a relationship, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I agree
Because
100%.
you have bands. I think bands and film directors, or authors. And I think over time, they change, you change, and then do you stick with them because, well, I've always stuck with them.
Obligation.
I've always done that. Or do you reach a point where you're just like, man, this is a grind. It's just not doing it for me. But also you as a person change, and there may be things in that just does not appeal to you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like you just genuinely lose interest in it.
That's well said. And
I think there are, and I do have some good examples of stuff that I would say it's a very small. I have very few examples of stuff that I have stayed with, and it's not out of obligation. It's because I still enjoy.
I agree. I'm right there with you.
Yeah. So, yeah, and we're not cutting any of that out because that's illustrating exactly what we're going to be talking about. So, thank you, Mike, for that thoughtful introduction. Now, that said, please, let's start. Now, do you want to start with what you've left behind and then work up to why don't we end with the good?
I think that's a better way to do it because we all have the stuff. I think, and I think me and Jared have known each other a really long time. And I think it's fair to say that we have latched on to things probably sooner than they earned that sort of loyalty,
slavish devotion.
Yes. Where suddenly we're like, oh, I have to get every single thing this one person did. It's absolutely mandatory.
Okay, start. Give me something.
I think a good example, and I think you're gonna know immediately remember this is remember we were both kind of going through a James Horner phase. And we'd go to McKay's and any soundtrack that had James Horner. And you made fun of me for a long time for one I bought.
Yeah.
Balto.
Balto, the dog story.
Yes. But it was like we'd go, oh, it's a James Horner soundtrack. Oh yeah, I gotta get because James Horner's the greatest ever. He did Star Trek and Aliens, and I just gotta have everything he's ever done.
He did Star Trek and Aliens,
You
and
jam
then
out the Krull.
Then he continued to do Star Trek and Aliens through his whole career.
What did he? So it was Battle Beyond the Stars, and then it morphed a little bit with Krull, and then it came into.
I think his big breakout was Star Trek 2.
And then Star Trek 2. Star Trek 2 was kind of like the
or
the
Aliens.
honing.
Actually, Aliens was probably his big breakout because they used to use that one track.
Yeah.
Like when the sound from Inception, that they used to do that.
Yeah.
They used to use that in like any trailer from the 80s. You could probably find that track that James Horner had composed.
Yeah. I think I reached for me, I reached Horner breaking point. I think after they released maybe the 5th Titanic album, like they just kept releasing like unreleased cues from Titanic, and I was like, okay, that's great. And I didn't hate the Titanic soundtrack when it first came out, but I grew to hate it just because of how ubiquitous it was in the entire world at that time. And I think that's sort of when my fascination with Horner sort of I was like, okay, I'm good.
Well, I think a better example for me, because I think my Horner fixation didn't last very long, but I think
Zimmer,
Elfman. There for a while, I was like,
but they're all like that now.
Everything. But what I noticed is when he became more mainstream, his stuff started to sound more generic, and he lost that quality that made him unique amongst other film composers.
See, I was the same way with Hans Zimmer. I mean, I was, die on that hill for Zimmer's music until Dune came out, and it was the biggest disappointment. Because believe it or not, I was looking forward not just to the movie, but I was looking forward to the music, because the fact that he was attached to it, I was really excited. And for what he did with like Inception and the Dark Knight series and stuff, I was like, that's great music, especially Inception. I absolutely love Inception. And I'm like, man, this is such a great story, and I cannot wait to hear the music that he makes for it. And it was so lackluster, and it was so disappointing. And I'm like, you know what? I got to give this guy a break.
Yeah,
and it was really disappointing to me.
It was just like noise. That score in particular was just like,
well, I think Hans Zimmer is a good example of someone who, I think, when we were talking about the maturity, I think you sort of reach a point with some of these people where you're like, not all of them are going to be winners.
Right.
And then you just find the ones you like.
But I know that we were talking about doing like the ones that are perfect towards the end, but since we're talking about composers, I think John Williams has been consistent throughout my entire life. I don't think I've ever really hated anything that John Williams has put out. He's just one of those composers that has always hit the mark for me. Even if the movies I didn't really care for that much, the music was always decent.
Yeah, I mean, he's always, I think, elevated the stuff that he's done. But it, like Mike was saying, everything he does isn't necessarily a home run. Like, you're not, I'm not humming the soundtrack to Lincoln like I am Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Right, of course.
But the score for Lincoln is excellent. But there's just some things that hit differently with John Williams.
Well, I think with film composers, and I don't think film composers are a really great example for this type of thing, because the thing with film composers is they're doing different styles of movies. So there's no way, like every score, Williams is so, in his time, he was so in demand. I mean, he's not going to do Superman or Star Wars every single time.
Correct.
I think if we're going to talk about someone that you'd be loyal to that has a more narrow field or narrow focus of work, I think someone as an example of I followed really hard and they just totally fell off for me was Tim Burton. I mean, his first
excellent
few movies. I mean, he was a person that Tim Burton, I'm going to see it. No question. And I think a really good example of something I saw that because it was him that was strange to me that people missed was Ed Wood. Ed Wood came and went, and I had seen it in the theater because it was Tim Burton, and I loved it. But his work definitely started. And I think the first movie that we saw, and I saw it with Jared, that I walked out of the theater like befuddled, was Planet of the Apes.
Oh,
that was kind of like the beginning of the end of my my love affair with Tim Burton.
Yeah. I remember the lead up to that movie. I was like, oh man, this is going to be great. Burton's going to put his weird sort of quirky spin on this material. And then when you saw it, it was just this bloated,
nonsensical.
Yes. And obviously like super commercial product that you usually, that he would not be associated with in the past. And that's a great example, Mike, because I mean, I couldn't tell you probably the last 3 or 4 Burton films that have come out. I think the last one I saw in the theater, I saw it with Terry in the theater, was Big Fish, which I thought is good.
Yeah, Big Fish is good.
And that's the thing, he made that in the midst of this commercialized crisis that he's going through, and I guess is still in. I mean, he's still like, if in interviews, he's still a giant weirdo. And
I think, and with Tim Burton, I think this could be something that is like goes through the other ones we discuss. Is I think they reach a point where they peak, they try to redefine themselves. It doesn't work, so then they try to go back to what they were, and they can't do it
because
they're not the same person they were when they did those early movies.
Correct. And so many of the people that we may be talking about, the problem is they peak so early, and they chase that for the rest of their career.
Yeah, they don't evolve.
You have to think, like, if you were known, like Mike, if you were known for something that you did when you were 22 years old and the world knew about it, and now you're 51 years old and you never quite got back there, I mean, that would drive anybody crazy. It would, I think, that especially once you reach a certain level, there's the weight of expectations. And is he going to do another one of those? So,
and that might be part of the obligation. Like you're hanging in there because you're hoping like that the next one is going to be it.
Yeah.
They're back, baby.
Yes.
I want to talk about something that was really big when I was a kid, that it was like the biggest thing in my world. And I think to Jared, it might've been, in your world. I know it was in your world too. And that was Transformers. And Transformers as toys and as a television show, the cartoon, it was like, that was my whole world. And, I had all the toys, and I never missed the show. And when the movie came out in 1986, I saw it in the theater, and Transformers to me was like, that was one of those childhood memories that, and then it went away, and it had different iterations, but I kind of like the G1, G2 Transformers, that went away, and it morphed into different things, and it kind of came and went in like different incarnations in like the Cartoon Network or whatnot. But I never kept up with that. But like when it was announced that we're going to get a Transformers movie again, when Michael Bay was putting it together, I was over the moon. I'm like, I cannot wait for this movie. And I have to tell you, I know some people love these movies. There's not a single modern Transformers movie that came out that I like. I absolutely hate them all. And it's not that they're not great action movies. It's not that they're not great, fun movies to watch. It's just my expectation of what I wanted to see was never fulfilled in those movies. And I kind of cast it off. I'm like, well, Transformers is ruined. It's never going to be what I want it to be. It's always going to be like a nostalgic memory. And I was kind of upset about that. But I'm like, it is what it is. I'm not going to enjoy these movies. And then Netflix came out with their Transformers series, which was really in the DNA of G1, G2, and it was fantastic. And I finally kind of came back around, and I found that I was loyal to a certain aspect of the franchise, and I wasn't willing to accept other incarnations of it. It had to kind of like fall into that little realm of what I wanted to see. And when I got it, I was very happy. But I couldn't just blanketly like enjoy Transformers. Does that make sense?
I understand. Like you start to pick and choose from these things that were once pillars for you, the things that you're going to enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
That comes with the maturity, that we just talked about. Like you accept the fact that they're not all going to be home runs.
Right.
And so like Matt said, he's loyal to a version, which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
But there's people out there who just try to gobble up any type of Transformers media out there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Correct. Well, the one thing I'm going to talk about, and this is actually what kicked off this discussion when I originally talked about it with TV's Matt Davis. Mike, you'll smile. Kevin Smith.
Okay. I'm curious to hear you say this because I had wondered for a long time if you still kept up with him.
Okay. So Kevin Smith, when he started with Clerks in 1995, he then did Mallrats a few years later, and he set up this thing he called the View Askewniverse, which basically were all the movies that involved Jay and Silent Bob. And all those movies were sort of interconnected somehow. Now, he did go off and direct other movies, like there was one terrible one with Ben Affleck and Jersey Girl, I think it was called.
Yeah.
He did Zack and Miri Make a Porno, which is hilarious if you've never seen that movie.
I've seen that one.
I love that.
It's not a Jay and Silent Bob one, though.
No, but he's in it, though.
No, he is.
Jay and Silent Bob, right.
And he also did that one with Bruce Willis where they ended up hating each other.
The cop movie with
with Tracy Morgan. Yeah. So, and he did a lot of his stuff started going straight to video on demand, and some of those movies I didn't even know about, but I always kept up with the View Askewniverse movies, and so the last one that came out was Clerks 3. And I knew 25 minutes into that, it was completely over for me.
It run its course.
I was sitting there because if in Clerks 2, he had, his big thing, he's very self-deprecating. He says he's a terrible filmmaker. He doesn't know how to do it. But
I agree with that.
Okay. But his movies got much better technically as he went along. Like I thought Clerks 2 was quite good. It looked slick. It was like a big budget Hollywood movie. It looked like one. He had, like Rosario Dawson, like legit people. It wasn't just his buddies that he was, doing movies with. But then comes the decline. Because they did the movie before Clerks 3 was Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, which I knew he was in trouble during that film. It was, he had all these celebrities come and do cameos and stuff, but it just felt sloppy, like he was sort of regressing. Like, hey, I shoot all this stuff on video now. It's no big deal. It doesn't have to look good. I don't have to take a lot of time with it. That's certainly what it felt like. And I talked to our buddy Mark about it, and I was like, that movie wasn't very good. But then Clerks 3 started, and I was like, oh, this is over. And
that's just the worst when you're starting a movie and you're like, oh no.
It's the thing that really struck me is like for the Clerks films, he would drag his buddies out who did literally nothing else. He'd pull his buddies out of mothballs who'd been off working their regular jobs in the interim years, and he'd put them in a movie again. When you've got Brian O'Halloran doing a scene with a real actress like Rosario Dawson, and he's trying to cry and emote, it just fell so flat on its face. And I was like, you know what? I just don't enjoy this anymore. So, and that's what me and Matt were talking about. Because he was a big Kevin Smith fan. He's the guy who would buy props off Kevin Smith's website. And he's like, yeah, Clerks 3, I'm tapping out. I'm done. He's lazy. He doesn't seem to care anymore. All this stuff since his heart attack just feels like half baked. And, and he tried to make Clerks 3 very autobiographical with one of the characters having a heart attack. And it was just really heavy handed, and it just wasn't funny. And that's what killed it for me. So Kevin Smith, he's off the list now.
Well, I do have to take a second to say something kind about him. I worked with a gentleman a couple years ago, and he got diagnosed with this very strange form of cancer. And I mean, it was basically terminal. And he spent the last months of his life in the hospital. And he was a huge Kevin Smith fan. And somehow Kevin Smith found out about it. And I don't know if it was via Zoom or what, but he contacted him and sent him a prop from Tusk. I won't say what the prop was.
Oh no, Jesus Christ.
But anyway, I thought that was, I'm not a big fan of Kevin Smith personally as a person or as a filmmaker, but I have to say that was a pretty cool thing that he did.
Stand-up guy. It's
no,
impressive.
I mean, yeah, but man, you got to stop, Kevin.
Well, unless Matt, you have some, I don't want to hog up.
No, hit it.
Well, I'm going to use one that falls under the obligation category. And this is kind of funny. Maybe Jared talking about Kevin Smith is what put it in my brain. But me and Jared had an ongoing back and forth because I've never been a Kevin Smith fan. So I would make fun of Kevin Smith. And every time I'd say something, Jared would come back with, well, let's watch Halloween 4. which Halloween 4 is actually pretty good, but whatever. So then one day I said to him, I said, Jared, every time I say something, you always, Halloween 4 is your go-to. And he just stopped and he went, oh yeah, you're right. It is. Having said that, Halloween is my obligation because I will. Now, aside from the Rob Zombie ones, which I think are total garbage. I mean, I could do a whole podcast on how horrible those movies are that Rob Zombie made. I have them all on 4K. I've had them on DVD. I've had them on. I mean, it's like a Blu-ray, and I've been loyal to that brand because it's really the first horror franchise that I got into as a kid. It was, I didn't get in. I got into it before Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street or any of those others. And I feel like there's stuff in it that I can enjoy. Even the ones that are bad, there's interesting production stories behind them that when I watch them, I can, it's kind of sort of like a study how to not make a movie type thing. But Halloween, I have stuck with Halloween. I think since Halloween 4, with the exception of the second Rob Zombie movie, because I was not going to fall for it again after seeing the first one. I think I've seen them all in the theater.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so here's a question for you, Mike. So, in the late 70s and 80s, I mean, if there was ever a heyday for horror movies, it was when we were growing up. So you had the big three, right? You had Jason, you had Mike Myers, and you had Freddy Krueger. Right. When I was growing up. So what about Mike Myers stuck out versus like the other two heavies? Now, given I think Nightmare on Elm Street movies were completely different kinds. I think Mike Myers and Jason Voorhees were much more like close in their style and like, the kind of like presence that they held. Freddy Krueger was completely like off the wall, different type of movie, but those are the big three heavies growing up. So what about Halloween? What made that stick out like over the Friday the 13th series?
That's a good question. I don't really know. I think there's the silent power of Michael Myers, the theme, obviously.
Yeah.
John Carpenter, who would go on to would fall definitely into this list,
Yeah.
this category where I
100%.
talked to. But I think it was just that silent force of just, you don't know what's going on. It's just the single-minded focus. And,
And they were more,
Have-
I guess they were more crafted, right? It was more of a plot than a teen slasher movie, which Friday
no,
the
well,
13th
no,
not the first one, but
they were designed to be a simple horror film, and then when they went to make the sequel, that's when the sister stuff came in, and it was sort of out of desperation to make a story out of it. But there was like a genuine attempt to like just make a straight up horror movie. And but the fascinating thing about this franchise, it's like a choose your own adventure. You can choose which storyline you want to follow, and B, even though it was so poorly executed, the way they tried to build a backstory for him with this thorn mythology and all this, it's really fascinating to me. And I felt like if they could have I think that's something they could have pulled off. They just didn't. I admire the fact that they tried to do something to try to explain them. But once again, it falls into that whole, like, the production was a mess. The director, you have a director coming in who's like, doesn't really know what he's doing. So he makes a big mess. But Michael Myers has always been my guy for whatever reason. I guess maybe it's The Mask, which it's really funny too. I mean, it was years later I found out, but it's a William Shatner mask.
isn't that funny?
Yeah.
And I'm a huge Captain Kirk fan. So
But you
I
never
don't
really
know.
could see it, could you? That blew me away when I first heard that.
And
too.
you know what? I'll be honest with you. I've always felt Halloween was a little kind of like classier, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a little more. I think it's had a few more layers than the other movies. But
I think it was. I think it tried to stay its hand and not fall into the slasher genre, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh man, the '80s were replete with B movie slashers, and it was great. I mean, I don't think that there's been there's been I think an indie resurgence in like that kind of slasher horror movie, but nothing captures the cheapness of a good '80s B movie horror movie. April Fools and The Dentist or whatever
Well, a lot of those filmmakers really, you had Tobe Hooper, Wes Craven, John Carpenter.
Yeah.
They really, I mean, some of those early movies launched careers for those people.
Matt, you got
Yeah.
another one.
Yeah, you know what? I'll tell you, I'm going to throw one out that it's a band actually that I'm kind of like, they can do no wrong, even though some of their albums aren't as good as others. I still will celebrate them all. And it's Pink Floyd. So Pink Floyd to me is one of those bands, except the real early stuff before they kind of really became Pink Floyd. But, once they hit their stride, I'm a big Pink Floyd fan, and, they're not obviously going to put out any new records anytime soon. But when it comes to like live albums, when I'll YouTube David Gilmour playing, live on stage. I'm a big Pink Floyd fan. So I give them an ultimate pass, even with their squabbles between like Roger Waters and David Gilmour, and how David Gilmour doesn't recognize Pink Floyd as a band anymore because he's doing his own solo thing. I kind of give everyone associated with it a pass because I just love Pink Floyd. So no matter what happens or how bad it gets or how off the beaten trail they go, I'm okay with it. I ride it. That's a hill I'm going to die on.
That's a band I followed really hard, and then I kind of fell off, and every now and then I go and revisit them. And with the exception of their first album, Piper at the Gates of Dawn, which is the one that Syd Barrett had the most influence over, I've enjoyed all their records.
Yeah.
Even the, Saucerful Secrets was was the second one they put out. And that's a really good album. And I think even the stuff they did without Waters, holds up pretty well. Like the Division Bell is really a great album.
Fantastic.
And it, for that to be, aside from that one they did, which was kind of outtakes from the Division Bell, to have that be their last album, High Hopes is one of my favorite songs of all time. So
yeah, I agree. And that was actually at a point where people thought Pink Floyd was kind of past their prime and couldn't put an album out. And it turned out, in my opinion, Division Bell was actually one of their best albums that they made.
Yeah, it was better than A Momentary Lapse of Reason. And I like Momentary Lapse of Reason
Yeah.
a lot. I listened to that.
But yeah, Pink Floyd turned out to be one of those, and you know what it was? It's part of it's the genesis of Pink Floyd in my life. My dad, when I was in, I don't know, early middle school or late elementary school, my twin brother and I had crappy little cassette boom boxes. They were like the worst, cheapest kind you could have. And my dad, now remember, I'm a twin. So my dad came home with one tape for both of us to share. And it was Pink Floyd's Momentary Lapse of Reason.
They're basically the same person.
Yeah, I mean, you look the same.
It was like, so my brother would listen to it for like a day, and then I get it for a day. But that was like one of the first cassette tapes I ever had. And that was like one of my first exposures to like my own music, not to what my parents were listening to, but like this is like my music that I get to listen to. And I always had a fascination with Pink Floyd from that point on. And
That's
like I said,
funny. I got Pink Floyd from my dad. My dad had some of their records.
oh really? Yeah. No, my dad, my parents have odd music tastes, and it's not mine. But yeah, Pink Floyd has always been around in my life. And I'm not like there's people that travel and watch bands like, like the Fish Heads and stuff. And, I'm not one of those people that are, going to like go around and preach Pink Floyd, but they're like one of the things that's always on in my car. And, I dig Pink Floyd. I always follow them, and I always give them a pass. And I listen to Roger Waters interviews, and as crazy as he gets, I like Roger Waters. And as crazy as David Gilmour now is getting, if you listen to anything, if you follow David Gilmour, he's becoming real ornery in his older age and not very nice to his former bandmates. But I don't care. I still listen to him. So it's like, I enjoy everything in all Pink Floyd.
I think sometimes it's best not to follow him, because Roger Waters is like a horrible person. He's a horrible
but he's
person.
always been a bad person in that way. It's just that he happened to be making decent music, but he's always been a really kind of awful person, highly opinionated.
Yes,
just a DB in general. But
if Jared doesn't mind, I have a good example of a band I followed really hard, and then I just totally abandoned them.
Please, that sounds fascinating.
Def Leppard.
Yeah,
I mean, I loved Def Leppard. I had On Through the Night, High and Dry, Pyromania. When Hysteria came out, I bought it. I listened to it nonstop. I listened to all four of those all the time. I loved all four. I can still go back and listen to those. I mean, I still like those albums. And then it was kind of funny. I would say this was a time, I was talking about how you kind of grow. You go through these changes, and I was going into adulthood from, high school. And it was in the 90s, and it was that same year, when thrash metal exploded. Like Slayer, Anthrax, Megadeth, Metallica all released their biggest albums of all time at that same time. And then Def Leppard Def Leppard released that.
So weak.
And I remember I was going to pre-order it.
Yeah.
I was really excited about that album.
A terrible video too.
And that video came out, and I'm just like,
they almost sold out and went hyper commercial. Do you remember that, Jared? Were you following Def Leppard at the time?
Well, I know the song. I mean, everybody knew the song that you're talking about.
But I mean, it's like Mike's right. Like Hysteria might have been one of the biggest albums in like 20 years in music.
Yeah, I mean, even if it had a lot of radio play. So
the band, that was the band. Like all four of those albums I listened to, I can listen to every single song, even like with the technology of skipping through. If I listen to those albums, I listen to those albums. I listen to them all the way through because I love every song on them. And I've actually tried to go back and listen to some of that stuff I missed out on, and man, it's they don't have Steve Clark. I think losing Pete Willis was a big deal, but because even though Phil Collin is listed on Pyromania, it was their first guitarist, Pete Willis, who was the songwriter and player on that album, And then when he was fired, they brought in Phil Collin, but they still had Steve Clark. And then Steve Clark died after Hysteria. And I think after Steve Clark died, they didn't have it anymore.
You know,
Wow.
they came out with a new song, I guess a new album recently, and I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of looking forward to hearing it. They teased it on the radio a lot, you know, like whatever the radio station on satellite radio I'm listening to, and you know when they finally released it, I thought it was awful. Did you hear it? I don't even know what the name of it is, but it's recent airplay. And,
I know they got Mutt Lange should come back and try to help him out a little bit, but
it just but you know some bands are better left in the past. You know,
well, I think it's like what we talked. They moved on. It didn't work because I think they tried to do a grunge album. That was another thing that hurt some. There was a couple bands that tried to do grunge, and it was like they're like, "Oh, this isn't working. Let's go back to what we did good." And you know, they just can't do it.
They couldn't recapture.
I'm going to tell you a band that, you know, in their early albums, I think is one of the greatest bands of all time is Metallica. But, you know, there came a point with Metallica where I had to let them go.
Yeah.
And there may be a few shining stars in their, you know, in the last 20 years, but generally speaking, they haven't put out a solid album since the Black Album, in my opinion.
Oh, I disagree. I think Load and Reload are really good.
No, you know what? Load and Reload are okay. And there's some great King Nothing, I think, is great. I think there's some really good songs on those albums. But as far as full albums go, I throw them away. Death Magnetic has a few songs I like.
Death Magnetic has, off the top of my head, The Day That Never Comes and All Nightmare Long are both solid, great songs. But Suicide is great. I mean, I think there's some good songs in the album, but as far as like putting when I think of the sound of Metallica, those earlier albums, all the way through the Black Album, that sound has not been replicated since. They don't have it.
It's too produced. You know, you can hear
it tries
way too hard, and it's just way too much put into it. And the sound is, even though you might like some of the songs, those are not the same sounding Metallica songs as what you found before.
Not at all.
And it's like, and I just kind of like walk away from it. So I like the Metallica of the past, and I'm not really bought into the Metallica of the present. So and Metallica was a huge band for me.
Me too.
And it's
I mean, I was always listening like that. Those first albums up to, you know, especially up to the Black Album. But I really liked Load and Reload. But you know, those first 4 and 5 albums, you know, that's just like,
and that's a lot of albums. I mean, that 4 or 5 albums is sometimes a whole band's discography, you know, like, and they're done. Like if a band makes 3 albums, 4 albums, that's a hell of an achievement. You know, they had done that before the 90s, and it was their best work in my opinion. But yeah, that's one of those, but they're still going and they're still touring and they're still making music. And
well, they have a new one coming out. And the only reason I'll be getting it is that my boys are into them now.
Is that
What's
right?
old is new. Yeah. They love Megadeth.
Well, we can thank Stranger Things for that, right? That really gave Metallica a whole new, you know, resurgence.
I don't know. I think. Do you think? I don't know. I think they have a. I think.
Well,
they didn't
that song. Well, yeah, but that song like got back into the top 40.
Yeah, I do know. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's funny. There's a meme where like it shows there's the top panel is like a bunch of girls looking like really like like upset,
disgusted,
like me talking about Metallica in 1991, and like
no, it's like me playing Master of Puppets in the 80s.
Yeah, and now they're all like cheering,
and then me playing Master of Puppets now. It's a bunch of like teen
it's
party
so
people. I was like, I saw that meme.
It's so true though,
because I saw all those faces when I had my Metallica T-shirt on.
Jared, there has to be a band that was the same for you.
Well, you know, I'm going to say something we can probably all agree on. I have one, and I'll talk about in a moment. But I got 2 words for you: Chinese democracy.
Oh God, the worst. And it's so true, because I still am a massive GNR fan.
Man, the thing wasn't the wait for that album like 20 years?
Yeah, it was ridiculous.
Like it, and maybe longer than that. And it was like, okay, you know, of course, Guns N' Roses blew up with Appetite for Destruction.
One of the best albums of all time, in my opinion.
And then they, you know, I think the,
Use Your Illusion
I think
albums.
the both Use Your Illusions, they there was good stuff, but there's some stuff that you could tell was tailored to maybe get some radio play.
Absolutely.
Real quick, I just want to say I actually just recently re-listened to those two albums, and they do not hold up for me at all.
See,
I really like those.
I disagree. I still love them, but you know what's funny? That was one of the biggest buildups to CD releases I can remember.
Yeah, but those albums were successful. Those albums were very successful for them.
And it went Appetite, and then they released Lies, which is kind of more of an underground.
It was
album.
a re-release,
right?
Yeah, and it was like an EP. It
wasn't huge, and it was one of those things that like parties, someone would have a copy of Lies, and be, oh, that's really cool. I haven't like really listened to that yet. And then Use Your Illusion came out, and then do you remember what the follow up after those were?
Spaghetti Incident.
God,
which
he did that Charles Manson song. He did not gain any friends with that one.
I remember the cover they did of I don't have anything. I don't have you.
It's terrible.
Oh gosh, I don't even remember. I know they did the Sympathy for the Devil, which was
they used that one in
supposed to be terrible.
Interview with the Vampire.
Yeah.
Which that's a great Rolling Stone song. So
yeah, but
I think the problem with Use Your Illusion is it's just Axl for 2 hours just griping.
Well, you're not wrong.
He's just like a big baby.
I'll tell you this, Jared, real quick. I read Duff McKagan's biography, his autobiography, Lies and Video, whatever it was. I can't remember the title. And it was a fascinating book, great book. And once he gets into the Use Your Illusion days, it's really funny because like he talks about like the early days where like they literally were living in a storage container in the back of a bar parking lot, and that's where they lived, and that's where they played, and that's where they all these like great stories happened.
Maybe that's they were living in Matt's or Mike's shed.
Yeah. But by the time they blew up and they got into the Use Your Illusion phase, like Axl became such a nutcase. Like he made them all move to Chicago because he's like, we get away from this LA scene because it's gonna kill us. And then he never showed up. The whole band's living in Chicago, and like Axl would fly in for like 3 hours, not record, then leave again. They'd all be like sitting in their apartment going, what the hell are we doing in Chicago? But it was just a whacked out time. And you're absolutely right. It was like 2 albums of Axl Rose showing off what he wanted to show off. So,
well, but I do remember. I don't really remember much about Chinese Democracy because I think I only listened to it all the way through once.
Yeah. I think I tried to listen to it. I don't think I could get through
I
it.
have it,
and it was more. It was more
to it all the way through,
and it wasn't like even out of obligation. It was more like curiosity because it was just like, what in the world?
And I just remember
so long to make.
I remember listening to that and thinking, if just one song can relight that magic spark, just one song that sounds like something from 1987. I mean, maybe, I'll replay this sometime, but nothing. It was, that was bad.
You know what? I'm going to listen to it. I have it on my computer. I'm going to put it on my phone, and I'm going to listen to it in the car and see what the heck was going on with that album. I'm going to see what's going on.
Well, you have to report back because that's
but in the vacuum that was created when GNR broke up, Slash and Scott Weiland from SDP formed Velvet Revolver, and I was really psyched that Velvet Revolver was going to become like that next band that was going to take over where the rock scene and where GNR left, and that band fell apart for me too. That was never. They
had a little bit of success though.
They had some, but like no one could capture that like big rise of what GNR had, in my opinion. They would like that was a great rock band. They did some great stuff and fell apart.
Well, now I guess they're touring again. They're but they're just playing the old hits. They're not. Well,
they did release a new song. They did do a new song.
Really?
And it's not very good.
I don't think I've heard it. Well, Axl,
I think it's when Axl wrote, and they're all playing it as the new GNR song.
Well, we all know that Axl Rose looks like your overweight aunt now.
I remember years ago. What
my friend
like, Keith. I remember it was just when they were Slash and Axl were talking again. And he said, I just saw a picture of Axl Rose and Slash, and he goes, it looked like a picture of 2 fat guys dressed up like Axl Rose and Slash.
Yes, that's the ravages of age.
And you know what? I don't expect my rock gods when I was a kid to maintain that and be that. But
Yeah.
Well, I think when you're a kid, you do.
no. But I mean, like
Well, of
now,
course.
I don't need them to be that. And it's okay if they evolve a little bit, but like,
I think when you're a kid, you just kind of like just assume nothing's going to change.
yeah.
Of
And then when you
course, of
and then when
course.
you become an adult, you're like,
Well, isn't that the truth though about music though? Once you lock into your music, things don't really change, and you don't really accept that new stuff like you did. And
well, like when Metallica started changing, people started, yeah, they cut their hair.
Oh yeah, I remember. I didn't even follow Metallica, and I
Didn't bother
remember
me.
when they cut their hair, it was
just
like,
make news.
what?
Yeah, it's funny.
So, but
So, do we want to talk about some stuff that we've hung with that we still appreciate?
we probably should. I think. I mean, I think there's still gold to be mined here. So we'll have to revisit this sometime because this is a show
Yeah,
with
why
many
don't we-
rabbit holes.
Why don't we put a pin in this one, and we'll come back and we'll do a part 2 sometime on this.
I think that's good. Why don't we save our untouched I don't know what we'll save the gold standards
That's a good
for
idea.
another episode, and
Well,
we'll come back to this. But
Well, speaking of gold standards, guys, the podcast rages on. Season 7. I can't believe we have 7 seasons, guys. We're doing our best to spread the word in the 25th century, and we love our viewers, we love our listeners, and share the podcast, share our YouTube channels, guys. If you haven't discovered us, welcome, and if you have, we'd love for you to share and spread the word because we love doing the show. And we're glad to be back, and we're going to be dropping episodes all over the place. We got all kinds of episodes: the good, the bad, the ugly. We got the Carbonite Chronicles. We got a Star Trek review coming up. We got so much to talk about
a
that you're
lot.
not going to believe it. So tune in, guys. We're dropping episodes all the time here on the Hyperspace.
You know you can't live without this content. So subscribe to the Hyperspace, podcasting in the 25th century. Follow us on social media, leave us a review, and join us next time as we take you into the 25th century.